For more than 20 years, the open patch of grass behind the Willow Creek neighborhood had been known simply as Meadow Field. It wasn't officially a park, and it didn't have fancy benches or playgrounds. But it was where kids played soccer after school, where dog owners gathered every evening, and where residents parked their cars when the streets were too crowded. No one ever questioned it, until the signs appeared. On a quiet Tuesday morning, residents walking their dogs noticed something strange along the edge of the field. New metal posts had been driven into the ground overnight. Hanging from them were bright white signs with bold red letters. At first, people assumed it was some kind of mistake. But by noon, the neighborhood group chat was exploding. "Is this a joke?" someone posted. "I've parked there for 10 years, another wrote. "Who approved this?" No one seemed to know. By late afternoon, people began gathering near the field. Small groups stood beside their cars, staring at the signs like they might disappear if ignored long enough. They didn't. Instead, another surprise arrived. 3 white pickup trucks rolled slowly into the neighborhood. On the doors were the words, Silverline Property Management. Behind them came 2 large tow trucks. And that's when the real tension began. Most residents had heard rumors that the Homeowners Association had been discussing new parking regulations. But HOA meetings were usually quiet affairs attended by maybe 5 or 6 retirees. No one expected anything this drastic. Apparently, the decision had been approved 2 weeks earlier during a short board meeting. According to the official notice, Meadow Field was technically owned by the HOA. The board claimed the land had been used improperly for years and that charging parking fees would help fund neighborhood improvements, streetlights, landscaping, security patrols. At least, that's what the letter said. But many residents had never even seen the notice. It was posted on the HOA website, one board member later explained. The problem was simple. Almost nobody checked the HOA website. Around p.m., people began confronting the property management workers installing a small payment kiosk near the entrance to the field. One resident, a mechanic named Carlos Mendoza, walked straight up to them. "You guys serious about this?" he asked. A worker shrugged. "We're just following orders." Carlos pointed to the cars parked across the field. "That's half the neighborhood." The worker didn't argue. He simply gestured toward the approaching tow trucks. "Better tell them to move." Within minutes, word spread through the streets. People rushed outside. Front doors slammed. Car alarms chirped as drivers unlocked their vehicles and hurried across the grass. Who had lived on Maple Court for 15 years. Her small silver sedan had been parked at the edge of the field while she worked a late shift at the pharmacy. The tow operator moved quickly. Steel arms slid under the car's wheels. Hydraulics lifted it smoothly off the ground. A crowd began gathering. "Hey," someone shouted. "She's not even home." The tow driver barely looked up. "Vehicles in violation." "Violation of what?" Another resident yelled. The driver pointed to the sign. The crowd grew louder. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Within minutes, the neighborhood's quiet field had turned into a scene of angry residents, flashing cameras, and idling tow trucks. A black SUV pulled up beside the field. Out stepped Gregory Harlan, president of the Willow Creek HOA. Tall, gray-haired, and always dressed like he was heading to a golf meeting, Harlan looked surprised by the crowd. He raised both hands. "Everyone relax." No one relaxed. "You can't just tow people," a resident shouted. Harlan adjusted his glasses. The community was notified. "That's not notification," another voice yelled. Harlan tried to remain calm. "This is private property owned by the HOA. The board voted to implement paid parking." Carlos stepped forward. "Since when do we pay to park in our own neighborhood?" Harlan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the tow trucks, then at the signs, then back at the crowd. "This policy begins today." While residents argued with the HOA president, the tow operators continued hooking vehicles. Another car, then another. Within 30 minutes, 4 cars were already loaded. People began panicking. Some drivers sprinted across the field just in time to stop their cars from being taken. Others arrived too late. The tow company workers remained professional but unmoved. Take it up with the HOA, they repeated. Meanwhile, tension kept rising. Someone called the police. Someone else called a local news station. And someone started digging through old property records. Because something about the whole situation didn't feel right. PM, a resident named Lydia Chen arrived at the field holding her laptop. She worked as a real estate paralegal and had access to public land records. She pushed through the crowd until she reached Carlos. "You're going to want to see this," she said. On her screen was a county property map. She zoomed in on Meadow Field. According to the county database, the land wasn't owned by the HOA. Carlos blinked. Then who owns it? Lydia turned the laptop so others could see. At the top of the record was the owner's name, a company no one in Willow Creek had ever heard of. Carlos marched straight toward Gregory Harlan. "Care to explain something?" he said, holding up Lydia's laptop. Harlan frowned. "What is this?" Carlos pointed to the ownership record. "You don't own the field." The HOA president's face tightened. "That information is outdated." Lydia stepped forward. "No, it's not." She rotated the screen. "The deed was updated 3 months ago." People leaned closer. Someone whispered, "So they're charging us for parking on land they don't even own." The murmuring turned into anger. Harlan suddenly looked less confident. "The HOA has usage rights," he said. "Show us," Carlos replied. Harlan didn't. Instead, he turned toward the tow trucks. "Continue operations." That's when things nearly exploded. 2 police cruisers rolled into Willow Creek. Officers stepped out and approached the crowd. "What's going on here?" Everyone started talking at once. Illegal towing, fake parking fees, property ownership disputes. The officers raised their hands, one at a time. Lydia showed them the property records. Carlos pointed to the tow trucks. Residents explained the new signs and fees. Then the officers walked over to Gregory Harlan. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes. When it ended, one officer turned to the tow operators. "Hold off on towing for now." The crowd erupted in cheers. But the officer held up a hand. "This is a civil dispute. We're going to verify the property ownership before any more vehicles are removed." The tow truck engines shut off. For the first time that evening, the field went quiet. But the situation was far from over. Because if the HOA didn't own Meadow Field, then someone else did. And whoever that was might have a very different plan for the land. The night after the confrontation at Meadow Field, Willow Creek felt like a different neighborhood. Porch lights stayed on later than usual. People stood in driveways talking in small groups. Phones buzzed constantly with messages in the community chat. No one was talking about the weather, school schedules, or weekend plans. Everyone was talking about the same thing. The field. For decades, Meadow Field had been a quiet piece of land where kids played soccer, families walked their dogs, and residents parked when the streets filled up. Now it had become the center of a battle. By the next morning, residents had organized something that almost never happened in Willow Creek. An emergency HOA meeting. Normally, HOA meetings attracted maybe 6 or 7 people. This time, more than 80 residents showed up. The small community clubhouse was packed. People stood along the walls and spilled out onto the patio. Gregory Harlan sat at the front table with the rest of the HOA board. His confident posture from the day before was gone. Across from him sat an angry crowd. Carlos Mendoza stood near the front with Lydia Chen beside him. When the meeting officially began, Harlan tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he said nervously. "I know there have been concerns regarding the Meadow Field development project." "Concerns?" someone shouted. "You try to charge us to park on land you don't even own." The room erupted with angry voices. Harlan tried to regain control. "Please. One person at a time." Carlos stepped forward. "No problem. I'll start." Carlos placed several printed documents on the table in front of the board. "These are property records Lydia pulled yesterday," he said. "They clearly show Meadow Field was sold 3 months ago to Green Valley Development." He looked directly at Harlan. "Why didn't you tell residents?" Harlan folded his hands. The board discussed the opportunity and voted unanimously to support the development. "You voted without us," Lydia said. "The HOA board has authority to negotiate certain agreements." A woman in the crowd stood up. My kids play there every day. Another resident added, you promised to protect community spaces when you ran for president. Harlan sighed. The development will bring improvements to the neighborhood. Carlos leaned forward. $500,000, right? The room went quiet. Harlan's eyes widened slightly. How did you? It's in the contract, Lydia interrupted. She slid another document across the table. Residents leaned forward. The deal was clear. Green Valley Development would contribute $500,000 to the HOA in exchange for community support of the apartment project. The crowd erupted again. But Lydia wasn't finished. There's something else, she said. She opened her laptop and projected a document onto the clubhouse television screen. While researching Green Valley Development last night, I found something interesting. The screen showed a list of company officers. At the top was the name Daniel Mercer, the representative who had visited the field. But below that was another name. Lydia zoomed in. Gregory Harlan, minority investor. Gasps filled the room. Carlos stared at Harlan. You're part owner of the development company. Harlan's face went pale. It's a small investment, he said quickly. You never disclosed that, Lydia replied. Several residents began shouting again. That's corruption. Conflict of interest. You used the HOA to help your own project. The board members beside Harlan looked shocked. Some clearly had known. One of the board members, an older woman named Margaret Doyle, slowly stood up. Gregory, she said firmly, is this true? Harlan looked around the room. It's not what it looks like. Margaret's voice hardened. Did you personally invest in Green Valley Development? After a long pause, Harlan answered quietly. Yes. The reaction was explosive. Residents shouted over one another. Margaret shook her head in disbelief. You never told the board. Harlan tried to defend himself. It didn't influence the decision. Carlos laughed bitterly. You tried to charge us parking fees on land connected to your own investment. Margaret turned toward the crowd. As vice president of the HOA board, she announced, I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Gregory Harlan as president due to conflict of interest. The room erupted in applause. Harlan slammed his hand on the table. You can't do that. Margaret looked at the HOA bylaws. Yes, we can. The board members whispered among themselves for a moment. Then Margaret spoke again. All board members in favor of removing Gregory Harlan from the position of HOA president. One by one, hands went up. The vote was unanimous. Harlan had been removed. The crowd burst into cheers. But Carlos raised his hand. Hold on, he said. The room quieted. Removing Harlan doesn't stop the development. Everyone slowly realized he was right. The contract with Green Valley Development still existed. Margaret nodded. We'll need legal advice. Lydia spoke up. I already contacted a land use attorney this morning. People looked at her in surprise. He believes the HOA may have violated state disclosure laws, she continued. If a board member has financial interest in a deal, it must be disclosed to residents. Carlos smiled slightly. So, the contract might be invalid. Possibly, Lydia said. Hope began spreading through the room. Over the next 2 weeks, Willow Creek transformed. Residents organized petitions. They attended city council meetings. Local news stations began covering the story. The headlines spread quickly. HOA president secretly invested in development project on neighborhood field. Under pressure, city officials started reviewing the development permits more carefully. Then another problem for Green Valley appeared. Environmental surveys revealed that Meadow Field contained a protected drainage wetland area that had been overlooked in early planning documents. That meant stricter building regulations, higher costs, possible delays. Green Valley Development suddenly faced a project that was becoming more trouble than it was worth. 2 months after the tow truck incident, a final announcement arrived. Green Valley Development released a statement. Due to community opposition and environmental complications, the company had decided to cancel the apartment project. Instead, they planned to sell the land. When the news reached Willow Creek, residents celebrated. But Carlos had another idea. What if we buy it, he suggested. The idea spread quickly. Through donations, community fundraising, and a small city grant, residents formed a nonprofit 1 year after the day the parking signs first appeared, Meadow Field looked very different, but not in the way developers had planned. Instead of apartments, the community built something else. A small playground, walking paths, soccer goals, benches, and picnic tables. At the entrance stood a wooden sign that read, Carlos stood near the soccer field one evening watching kids play. Lydia walked up beside him. Hard to believe this all started because of parking fees, she said. Carlos smiled. Funny thing is, he replied, if they hadn't tried to charge us $25 to park. He looked across the field at families laughing and children running through the grass. We might have lost this place forever. The sunset spread across the sky above Meadow Field. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt peaceful again.